Brothers and sisters, we want to continue our journey into the New Testament, and today we want to talk about gospel, the first part of the New Testament. Gospel means good news, and this good news is rooted in the Old Testament, where we discover a God who will not allow sin, darkness, and death to win the battle. In fact, God is victorious throughout the Old Testament over sin, darkness, and death, and we discover this as a principle of the entire Bible in the story of Joseph. Joseph says to his brothers at the end of the book of Genesis, "You intended to do me evil, but God changed this into good." Even when God's people chooses sin that leads to death and exile, God raises his people from the dead. In the New Testament, there is one gospel, one good news, and that is what we sing during the Easter season. Christ has risen from the dead. He has conquered death by death and has given life to those in the tombs. This is the center of the New Testament, that Christ the crucified one is also Christ the risen one, for the tomb is empty. In the New Testament, there are 4 books of the Gospel, attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each one offers a very special perspective on who Jesus is, a particular icon recounting the story of Jesus from a different angle. In the beautiful Maronite liturgy, this diversity is expressed thus. Matthew announced the mystery of his Christological identity, Mark the mystery of his human identity, Luke the mystery of his salvific identity, and John the mystery of his divine identity. At the end of the 2nd century, a Syrian theologian writing in Syriac proposed a book to replace the 4 different books of the Gospel. He called it the Diatessaron. Tatian, from the 4 books of the Gospel, developed one unified narrative. The Church Fathers rejected this easy solution, recognizing the richness and the depth of the diversity of the 4, rather than choosing one simple narrative. According to scientific studies, the book of the Gospel of Mark was the first to be written. It is the shortest, telling Jesus' story from the time of the baptism in the Jordan River by John the Baptist until the discovery of the empty tomb following his death and burial. At the center of this book is Jesus' question to his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" In Mark's book, the disciples struggle to understand what it means that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God, and yet that he must suffer much. Matthew wrote his book, basing himself strongly on what Mark had written, but adding new perspectives. He begins his story with Joseph, the exemplary man of God, and describes the circumstances of the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. He ends with the risen Jesus commanding his disciples to go out and baptize all nations. Central to Matthew's story is Jesus presented as a new Moses, teaching a new law, a new Torah that deepens the understanding of the old one. Jesus explains his teaching in 5 long sermons. These teachings prepare the disciples to to enter the kingdom of heaven. Luke, also drawing on Mark, tells his story, focusing in the beginning on the person of Mary, mother of Jesus, the exemplary disciple who listens closely to the word of God. Luke plots out a sacred geography. Jesus' mission begins in Galilee, where Jesus shows who he is through his miracles. And then he sets his face to go to Jerusalem. And on the way, described in long chapters in the Gospel of Luke, he explains what it means to be a disciple, using many parables. Finally, he enters Jerusalem, teaching where all this is headed, toward the cross and beyond. Luke's book of the Gospel ends with the ascension of the risen Jesus into heaven. But this is not the end of Luke's story, as he will write another volume about the church. Finally, John brings his own very special perspectives. He begins with the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth, understanding that Jesus is the Word by which God creates everything. And that Word becomes flesh in Jesus, who teaches his listeners about God and the relationship between God and his Son. This Son has come into the world to lead us all into the embrace of God the Father. In John's book, a first part, the Book of Signs, reveals who Jesus is and contains long dialogues with people who come to engage with Jesus and in his words discover who Jesus is. In the second part, Jesus prepares his disciples for his death and resurrection, particularly at the Last Supper. The crucified Jesus has his side pierced, and in the blood and water that emerge, we as church are born. The risen Jesus breathes into his disciples, creating them anew. The 4 books of the Gospel constitute the very heart of our Christian Bible. There, where we learn how to say what we proclaim with all of our might: Jesus Christ is risen.